No cameras were rolling. No audience was laughing. No monologue was being written. And yet, this was the moment that nearly broke Conan O'Brien. It happened in a quiet hallway, far from the spotlight that had defined both their lives. Jay Leno stood just a few feet away, calm, familiar, almost casual. To anyone watching from a distance, it looked like two legends sharing a polite exchange. The kind of moment no one would remember. But then, Jay leaned in and said one sentence. Not loud, not dramatic, just honest. And within seconds, Conan O'Brien's body betrayed him. His smile vanished. His hands trembled. His breath caught. And before anyone could react, Conan sank down, overwhelmed, not by anger, not by rage, but by something far heavier. Relief, shock, and a truth he had waited years to hear. People later tried to guess what happened. Some said it was stress, others said exhaustion. But those explanations miss the real story. Because what caused Conan to collapse wasn't physical weakness. It was the sudden release of a wound that had never healed. For years, Conan carried a quiet question inside him, a question he never asked out loud, a question he buried beneath jokes, smiles, and self-deprecation, a question that Jay Leno finally answered in one sentence. And that sentence changed everything. What makes this moment so powerful isn't just what was said, it's why it took so long to say it. Because this wasn't just about television, it was about legacy, about silence, about what happens when someone waits years to hear the truth and finally gets it. But to understand why Conan collapsed, you have to go back to the beginning. Stay with me, because what happened next explains everything. And before we continue, where are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments. If you enjoy deep, emotional stories like this, like and subscribe. The most powerful part of this story is still ahead. What was the promise that set this tragedy in motion? To the public, late-night television looks like fun. Bright lights, big laughs, famous guests. But behind the curtain, it's a battlefield of identity and survival. For Conan O'Brien, the stakes were never just ratings. They were personal. Conan wasn't just trying to host a show, he was trying to prove he belonged. From the very beginning, he carried the weight of comparison. Compared to legends, compared to expectations, compared to the man who came before him, Jay Leno. Jay wasn't just a host, he was an institution, a symbol of stability in an industry built on insecurity. And for years, Conan lived in the shadow of that stability, even when the spotlight finally turned toward him. Here's the part most people don't realize. When Conan stepped into the role he had dreamed of his entire life, he didn't feel victorious. He felt exposed. Because deep down, there was one thing he needed more than contracts, headlines, or applause. He needed validation. Not from executives, not from critics, but from the one man who could tell him the truth about whether he truly belonged there. And that man stayed silent. That silence became the real danger. Because when silence stretches long enough, it becomes self-doubt. And when self-doubt goes unanswered, it reshapes who you believe you are. Conan didn't just fear failing the audience. He feared failing a legacy that was never fully handed to him. And Jay carried his own weight, the weight of knowing something he never said might one day need to be said. What happens when two men carry the same moment in completely different ways? That answer was waiting, quietly, for years. But where did this all begin? And what promise started it all? Here is the expanded version of Section 3, rewritten to be much deeper, more emotional, and around 450 words, while preserving your tone, rules, CTAs, and cliffhanger. Nothing is added that breaks policy or era realism.
Long before the collapse, there was a promise.
Conan O'Brien was never supposed to be safe. From the moment he stepped into television, he felt like an outsider in a world that preferred familiar faces and predictable voices. His humor wasn't smooth or effortless. It was awkward, intellectual, sometimes strange. The kind of comedy that made executives nervous and audiences unsure, at least at first. And that's exactly why people underestimated him. What they didn't see was how hard Conan worked when no one was watching. He wasn't naturally confident. He earned everything the slow way. He wrote late into the night. He rewrote jokes that didn't land. He absorbed public criticism that would have broken most people. And when he failed, and he did, many times, he failed in front of millions. But he never quit.
So when the opportunity finally came, it didn't feel real. The promise of that chair, the promise of succession, the idea that one day the torch of late-night television would be passed cleanly, without conflict or confusion. For someone who had spent his entire career proving he belonged, it felt like validation at last. But for Conan, the promise was never about power. It was about belonging. He believed that if the promise existed, then respect existed too. That somewhere inside that agreement was a quiet, unspoken message meant just for him. You're ready. You're worthy. You've earned this. What Conan didn't understand yet was that promises don't exist on paper alone. They exist inside people. And people hesitate. As the years passed, Conan prepared in silence. He studied the craft. He sharpened his voice. He imagined what it would mean to honor the legacy while still being himself. All the while, Jay remained firmly in place, smiling, steady, untouchable. A presence that never faded, even when the future had already been promised away. Conan never complained publicly. He never lashed out. He never made demands. Instead, he internalized everything. Because deep down, he believed that when the moment finally arrived, the truth would arrive with it. That Jay would say something, anything, even a single sentence. If you've ever waited for acknowledgement that never came, you already understand Conan's pain. Before we go further, like this video and subscribe if stories about legacy, silence, and truth resonate with you. And tell us, where are you watching from right now? But what happened when the promise finally became reality and the silence didn't break? When Conan finally stepped into the role, the world saw a milestone. Headlines celebrated it. Commentators debated it. Late-night television announced a new era. From the outside, it looked like a victory, a long-awaited moment where talent met destiny. But Conan felt something very different. He felt alone. Every night, he walked onto that stage with a practiced smile, the kind comedians learn to wear like armor. The jokes landed, the audience laughed on cue, applause filled the room. To millions watching at home, everything looked exactly as it should. But behind the curtain, the silence screamed. Jay said nothing. No quiet encouragement, no public acknowledgement, no private reassurance, not even regret. And that silence became louder than any headline ever written. Conan started questioning things he had never questioned before. Thoughts crept in during the quiet moments, the moments after the laughter faded and the studio lights dimmed. Was I chosen or just tolerated? Was this promise real or merely convenient?
Did I earn this, or was I filling time? These were not questions Conan wanted to ask. They were questions that arrived uninvited and refused to leave. He never asked Jay directly. Some questions feel too dangerous to voice, because once you ask them, you lose the comfort of uncertainty. Once you ask, you must be prepared to live with the answer, whatever it may be. So Conan lived with the uncertainty instead, night after night, show after show. Each episode added another layer, another quiet doubt, another moment where silence filled the space where reassurance should have been. And slowly, that silence carved itself deeper into him. What most people don't see is that comedians feel everything. They feel rejection more sharply. They absorb tension more deeply. They sense absence where others might not. But they learn to hide it, because humor is both their weapon and their shield.
Conan hid it in irony, in self-deprecation, in jokes that made others laugh while quietly disarming his own fear. But inside, something was unraveling. Because silence doesn't stay neutral forever. Eventually, it becomes a verdict. And Conan began to believe the verdict had already been delivered, without a word. That the silence meant disapproval. That the absence of acknowledgement was the answer itself. Not chosen, not endorsed, just endured. And that belief followed him long after the applause stopped. It followed him through decisions, through self-doubt, through moments where confidence should have been natural, but wasn't. Because when the person you hoped would speak never does, you start answering for them. And Conan did. Then, years later, Jay finally spoke. Careers evolved, public narratives shifted, and the wounds that were never addressed didn't disappear. They hardened. Time has a way of calcifying pain when it's left untouched. Conan and Jay had both moved forward in their own ways. Different paths, different stages, different chapters. From the outside, it looked like everything had settled, that whatever tension once existed had faded with distance and success. But some things don't fade. They wait. And then, unexpectedly, they found themselves face to face again. No cameras, no scripts, no audience applause to hide behind. Just two men standing in the same space, with everything that had never been said between them. Jay didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture. He didn't defend himself. There were no excuses, no explanations wrapped in industry language. He simply spoke. One sentence. A sentence delivered calmly, almost quietly, but heavy enough to carry years of silence inside it. It was a sentence that acknowledged what Conan had carried alone. A sentence that admitted what silence had cost. Not in ratings, not in careers, but in confidence. A sentence that reframed the past, not as failure, not as weakness, but as truth. And that's when Conan collapsed. Not dramatically, not for attention, but because his body reacted before his mind could. Not because the sentence hurt, but because it healed. Because in that single moment, Conan realized something life-changing. He hadn't imagined the struggle. He hadn't exaggerated the weight. He hadn't been too sensitive, too insecure, or too weak. He had been human, inside a system that never explained itself. And that realization hit all at once. The collapse wasn't weakness. It was release. Years of tension left his body in seconds. Years of self-questioning finally had an answer. Years of replaying conversations that never happened suddenly stopped. Because when clarity arrives after too long, the body doesn't always know how to stay upright. Sometimes it has to let go. Sometimes it has to sit down. Sometimes it has to surrender the weight it's been carrying quietly for years. And in that moment, Conan wasn't falling apart. He was finally being put back together. If this moment is hitting close to home, stay with me. Like the video, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Because what happens after the truth is spoken matters just as much as the truth itself. But what changed after that sentence was finally spoken? After that moment, something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that only the people involved could truly feel. Conan didn't need answers anymore, because he finally had them. Not explanations wrapped in public statements or interviews, but something far more personal. He had clarity. And clarity has a way of quieting the mind in places nothing else can reach. The past didn't disappear. It didn't suddenly become painless, but it lost its grip. Memories that once replayed themselves over and over no longer carried the same weight. They became events instead of judgments, experiences instead of accusations. For the first time in years, Conan wasn't carrying an unanswered question. And when questions stop haunting you, creativity changes, confidence changes. Peace enters quietly, without announcing itself. Conan began to notice it in small ways. Decisions felt lighter. Humor flowed without needing to protect anything. He no longer felt the need to prove he deserved space. He simply occupied it, fully, honestly, without apology. The absence of doubt created room for joy. Jay, too, was changed by that moment. Not because he lost anything, but because he finally acknowledged something he had carried silently himself. Responsibility has weight, even when it's unspoken. And acknowledging it doesn't weaken a person. It humanizes them. That acknowledgement didn't rewrite history. It didn't undo past choices or repair every consequence. But it redeemed understanding. It allowed two people to see the same moment through the same lens. Finally. And that matters more than people realize. Because when understanding is shared, resentment loses its fuel. That one sentence didn't fix television. It didn't repair an industry built on competition and pressure. It didn't erase public narratives or private scars. But it freed the human being. It freed Conan from the need to carry unanswered questions into every new chapter. It freed Jay from the weight of silence that had lingered far longer than intended. And sometimes, freedom doesn't look like celebration. Sometimes, it looks like calm. Sometimes, it looks like finally being able to breathe. Sometimes, it looks like walking forward without looking back every few steps to ask, was it really my fault? So what does this moment mean now, years later? Today, Conan stands fully in his own voice. Not as a successor, not as a replacement, but as himself. And Jay's sentence remains private, because some truths are meant to heal people, not entertain audiences. This story reminds us of something powerful. Silence can wound, truth can heal, and timing matters more than we think. If you've ever waited for acknowledgement, if you've ever questioned your worth because someone stayed silent, this story is for you. Sometimes, one sentence can change a life. If this story meant something to you, like, subscribe, and share it. And one last time, Where are you watching from today? Your story matters too.